Welcome to the 24th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival, one of the world's largest and oldest Jewish cultural arts events. We want to thank all the members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially the presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for their continued support throughout all these years. My name is David Rowland, and I'm excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with Robert Carr, the director of the movie Different JOHNS, which is premiering at this year's festival. Thank you all for joining us. Robert, maybe we could start off by talking what first inspired you to make this film.
Oh, hello, David. I have to be honest, I'm an accidental filmmaker. It was a rather a strange route, which started, I suppose, in Long Island, coming across a whole selection of records, like old folkways records, which you probably know are beautiful objects in themselves, and picking up this big selection of records and traipsing across the States and then bringing them back to France, and then over a couple of years kind of listening to them, enjoying them. But there was always this name that came up, either as a musician himself, or as a graphic designer, or as a producer of the actual record, or someone who's just done the linear notes. And this was the subject of the film, John Cohen. And after I say we, it was myself and my wife, we kind of got excited about this person, but these things just sit on the back burner. And then we noticed, or she had noticed in some kind of trashy magazine, that there was a photographic show, which was about an hour's trek from where we live. And it was by someone called John Cohen. And we're thinking, well, is this the same John Cohen? And well, we decided, yeah, it looks like it. And we decided it was, and we went along with our records and met John, and of course asked him to sign our records, and just hung with him for a couple of days. And then we invited him over to ours, and we just spent time together. And we, of course, at that point had just seen maybe two sides of him as a photographer and as a musician. And while he was hanging out here within the banter, it seems, okay, well, I don't know. We were making a film, which started here. Then we went over, we did the first shooting over in the States. We did a road trip with him. We went up over to New York, and then up to upstate New York, where he was living at the time, and then down to Washington and North Carolina, and that was enough, actually. That was quite a lot of footage. Came back. I started editing, or with an editor. We were going through the footage, seeing what we have, and in fact, all that was happening is we were just getting more questions. It's like, well, hold it, because you're making it's a documentary, so you're making the connections, and it was like, well, hold it, there were so many unanswered questions in that first edit. What I did was I put together the kind of form of trailer, and I put it on Kickstarter. I'm being quite honest, and it got crowdfunding, which well surpassed our hopes. And then with that, I was able to organize a second shooting again over in America and also in Peru. We went down to Peru, which you've seen in the film, and had a great time, had a really interesting time. I'm more of a sea level person. I found it actually quite painful up in the mountains, because it was like 5,000 meters height I was suffering. But there was John at the time. He was 84, and he was loving it. He was in his element, because he had first been there in 1956. So, and he hadn't been there, I think, for maybe he had been there 10 years before. So it great. It gave us the beginning and the end of the film, and it helped answer a lot of the questions about what was driving John himself. I think I wouldn't have been. How did it arrive? It arrived a bit by accident. We hadn't planned to go to Peru. We hadn't actually planned to make a film, and we ended up making a full-length documentary, which one of the reasons for it, I suppose, is I was learning all the way along. You know, to be quite selfish about it, it was I was enjoying all this knowledge coming in. Certain times it was true. It was sometimes a bit too much, and one was getting frustrated in the edit. But anyway, does that answer your question?
Definitely, definitely. And as an accidental documentary filmmaker, and your subject was an accidental documentary filmmaker too.
Yeah.
Did he give you guidance on making the movie at all while he
Well,
was?
as we've seen, he was actually quite an accomplished filmmaker himself, but in primarily short documentaries, and at a time where the technology, he didn't have the technology at his disposal that we had, which of course made it much easier. He was up in Peru having to sleep with the batteries of his camera to keep them so they would work the next morning to keep them warm. So no, he was bright enough to leave me alone. I would come back to him and I would show him rough edits, and he would give me his opinion. I would listen, I would disagree or whatever. But yes, he at the same time, the frustration was that he was, how can we put it? He was frustratingly modest. So it really, I had to come back and ask pointed questions. And it wasn't because he had, I think sometimes because so much went on in his life, he just actually forgot about certain connections we were making in the edit, saying, well, how is this? How did you meet this person? What happened after this? Because he was trying to do, you know, certain points of his life, he was doing 4 different things at the same time, which were interconnected. And I was sometimes having problems going, well, how were you doing this? How did you find the time? But no, he was very gracious. And he did it. Sadly, he passed away last year, but he had seen the final edit. He was as happy. No, he was happy. Of course, he has something to say. What do you expect? But no, he was very happy. He thanked me, which was great.
And in the end, it mentions at the end of the movie that he passed away a couple of years ago.
Last year. Yeah.
Last year. What was the timeline? Can you of making the film? When did you start filming it?
The first bit of filming, I think, was 2014. It goes quickly, but in fact, because the edit from the second point of filming, which would have been 2015, I think, the second load of filming, and then it was like part-time editing as well. So it was kind of a month on, month off, and as you probably saw, there's a lot of material in there. And in retrospect, one could probably made chosen a simpler subject and a little less information in there. But as I say, what we weren't trying to show anything. What we were explaining, that it was possible to do 4 or 5 things really well. Which is maybe in America you have more an acceptance of that. Over here, the idea is you just do one thing really well, not 4 or 5. You know, to be a renowned musician at the same time, a renowned photographer at the same time, a renowned filmmaker, and as an artist, he was a very good artist as well. And I'm sure there's something I've forgotten. Yeah, well, he was an anthropologist and a musicologist as well. You know, the work he did in Peru, and it was something, the frustration, of course, there's a lot which went into rough edits and was taken out just because it would have made a very, very long film. But the work he had done in Peru has been recognized as the best work no, not the best work. It's reference material. And he wasn't actually an anthropologist when he went in there, but he documented so well. This was on the weaving, and then he went back and filmed the people. That it's reference material for anthropologists. So yes, you know, so you stand back in kind of awe of anyone. I suppose it's the admiration of just people doing things very, very well to the, you know, to the best of their ability, and past that.
And when you started making the film in 2014, through the process of creating the film, how did it change from your original vision? How did the actual film change from what you originally set out to film?
Well, as I say, it changed quite a lot, but that was really his fault, because at the beginning it was a much simpler movie. It was really, oh, John, he's a photographer, musician, and then, as I say, discovering in the edit is, oh, damn, why didn't he tell us about this, or why didn't he tell us about that? You know, this is interesting. So, was there a fixed kind of form of screenplay? No, there wasn't. There was certainly a lot of work was done in the edit, in putting the film together. There was, to be honest, when I went to Peru, I had set out certain shots I wanted and a certain logic and certain information I had to get, because I couldn't really do it again. And that went in, but I think that was a bit more experience. Having had a bit more experience, having the first round of filming, which was a bit more, thanks to the technology I was talking about, you could actually just film and not having to worry really about you. Actually, it was sometimes best just leave the camera on and see what happens. Because I don't know if you've had this experience, but the first time round, I was camera, sound, and chauffeur and everything. So sometimes it was very stressful, because you could feel something interesting was happening, but you weren't quite sure what it was. So you really had to be on your toes, keep shooting, double checking that the sound's working, because without the sound, you've got nothing. And then see what happens. And later on in the edit, you'll say, yeah, got it. Okay, we've got the end of the story. Now we've got to discover what the beginning of the story was. So I think, does that answer your question?
Definitely.
Okay.
And was there anything for people who just enjoyed the film? You know, obviously you have to make it a decent length, but I'm sure you filmed so much. Was there anything that people might be interested to know about that had to get stuck on the cutting room floor?
Well, I did, for the people that gave money to Kickstarter, I actually did a kind of extras, which I sent to them. Yes, there were stories there were lovely stories of him as a teacher, because he was a teacher as well, a professor, which were great, but there just wasn't really enough time. There was a lot more of him playing music, which again, there wasn't really enough time. It wasn't a concert film. It was a film about somebody. What else was in there? Oh yes, and there was a lovely bit of footage in the library, because he kind of opened doors for us. We were very lucky, because we're in the Library of Congress, filming there down in the archives of the Library of Congress, which is about 6 floors below. And Todd Harvey, who is, what is he? He's head of, I apologize, he's head of something. Anyway, he was the man that was there, and he was full of stories, and they actually had a lovely thing in common, which was to do with somebody called Harry Smith, who they were trying to get into the library. I don't know if Harry Smith was responsible for the folk music anthology, which was this kind of mythical album that Folkways put out in like 8, which was all the work of Harry Smith, but kind of started the whole folk scene up in the States. And they were both trying to get him into the Library of Congress. But the Library of Congress don't really want him, because in the end, Harry Smith didn't actually really produce anything. He was a great filmmaker, but he didn't really produce anything. He put this album together out of bootlegs and such like. But anyway, I've just done a long explanation. So yes, of course there are extras, but you know, at the same time, it was trying to get a film that people would watch. You don't. You want them to have the information, but at the same time, you have to be very careful of just actually then getting bored. Not because it's boring, but because at certain points they just don't have enough information already to understand what's going on. But you yourself will know this from writing screenplays. To go from, you can't just jump into a subject without giving a few clues. Yeah,
definitely. And for the people who stuck around to watch this interview, I'm sure they want to learn as much about John as they can. Where do you recommend they go? Are there albums, books that you recommend?
Oh, well, he has, because he was in a group, as we saw in the call, the News Lost City Ramblers, who I think the whole back catalogue is on Folkways, Smithsonian Folkways, I think it is now. John has if you see his photographic work, you just type John Cohen and that will come up. He has a gallerist in New York. His films are harder, but they're, there is a site which has a lot of his films, or will be bringing them out, and I'm sorry, I can't remember at the moment. I don't want to give the wrong name of the site, but he should have. I think his son is redoing his site, which will give references, because he produced like 20 or 30 films, and as we saw in the film, they weren't best accepted by the large companies, but that's because he didn't. It always had to be honest filmmaking. He didn't like things to be changed in the edit to suit the distributor. This is a story, because he did the research, and he stuck by his guns on that, which didn't always bode well for him. And that was the beauty. This was the other point was trying to make with the film, that it was from our point of view, from my point of view, a narration of he was not waiting around for permission or the money to go do these things. He did them. He didn't really, and we saw it in the film. People didn't always understand his motives. They thought he was making, at certain points, they thought he was making money out of stuff, which he wasn't. He was, he worked as a professor, and he was putting his money he was making there into making his films. He was very generous with his time for other people, asking for information and such like, because he kind of became an expert in a number of directions, be it in Peru or on the musicology as well. So, yes, actually, let's be clear about this. Part of the film, it wasn't trying to be kind of didactic as, oh, this is how you should do things, but it was in the admiration of, look, he just went out, he did it. He, as I said, he wasn't asking permission. He was following what interested him, and as he quite rightly said, one thing would lead to another. So there was a kind of bizarre route, which wasn't necessarily preordained, but it was kind of, I suppose, preordained there. It was what would excite him, send him off in another direction. And it wasn't the money. It's probably clear in the film. I think it's fairly self-evident. But it is in these times. I've shown it to younger people. I have teenage children, shown it to them, and they get it. It's not about waiting around, and because now people will wait and say, well, I'm not going to do this until I've got someone to put up some money first, or no, he just went and did it. And that is an inspiration for me, and there should be more of that.
And now that you've finished this long journey of completing this film, do you have another passion project? Do you have another film you're planning to make?
But I will say these things are never finished. At the moment, I'm having to do versions for Europe, so the language, and of course I'm sitting there going, why did I make a film that people speak so much? Because to do all the subtitles, the languages, it's like, this will never be finished. No, but yes, I am. I'm working on another project, which is more based in Britain. Again, about someone who's kind of been and gone. It's a film about motorbikes, or a particular motorbike, which is called The Vincent, and the man that designed it, and basically it's this kind of motorbike that made him famous, but also basically killed him. So a film on that. And I have another project which is also, I've got to see what happens. It's related to something which turned up while I was filming with John, but it's growing slowly. You know, as you probably know, you can't. You want to go, but it was much easier with John because that was one person. We went and we did it. But in the real world, it is a lot harder. You kind of got to get your ducks in order, and people say yes, come here now, film. And then you're going, well, this would be great if this other person will say yes as well. So yeah, no, it was a great learning curve for me. My training was actually in design. I make stuff. So I suppose I didn't really see the film as kind of, I kind of construct in 3D out of nothing, and this was just constructing in 2D. And pieces have to fit together and such like. It was a similar logic. So after that experience, you kind of think, well, yeah, no, this was great. I enjoy discovering new things, and a film is a great way to discover stuff. People open up, and you probably had this much more so than just over a casual conversation. Yeah. So yes, I am working on further projects, future projects.
Great. Well, thank you, Robert. Thanks again, Robert Carr, the director of Different Johns. I'm David Rowland. Thank you all for joining us.
Okay, well, goodbye. I hope you enjoyed the film, and thank you, David.